I'm actually somebody who's been working on systems and democracy for about the past 15 years. I mean, I've been in technology for most of my life and also an activist because I'm a person, and whether it was my children's whatever PTA or municipal or whatever. So I've just been a regular human being with a job and with some interest in the world. And over the last 15 years, I've been really thinking about okay, what would democracy look like, and how would we create a new system that would actually be fit for purpose as we're in this time of transition? And I got into the crypto world about 7 years ago because in crypto, they were asking these questions. Okay, what if we printed our own money? And then what type of democracy do we want? It's a place where we could experiment with democracy. And since we only had funny money that we printed out of thin air, and we didn't have any weapons, and we didn't have any food supplies or any fossil fuels, we couldn't really do any harm, which is, we can say that of very few industries. And I've been following Joe and the design school and the bioregional movement for quite a while now because when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, this is a plan to really rethink democracy around different types of assumptions, different borders, and on a planetary level. And about a year ago, I sort of declared myself responsible for the systems orchestration for the bioregional movement. That's really how I fit into this movement, is to really think about what are the systems that hold together organizations within a bioregion, and what are the systems that hold together bioregion to bioregion, and what does it even mean systems?
Could you give an example of one of the attempts to put some of this into practice?
The first thing that I tell people, I try to explain, is that when we talk about governance, usually people talk about decision making, but decision making happens inside a framework. It's like, okay, if there's trains going to the city, if they have train tracks, you can have trains. And if you have a river, you can have boats. And so a lot of the decisions that we make in our governance process never work because we haven't thought about what is the framework within which those decisions can be made. And so I talk about three aspects of that framework. One aspect is the circulatory system. Money is the circulatory system for the existing order. It's not the default for most of humanity most of the time. It's useful for certain things, but transactional money has not been the default for most humans for most of human history. And as you can see, if you thought about it as a circulatory system, you'd be like, wow, if my body's circulatory system worked that well, my head would have fallen off by now. And we would like, as humanity, a circulatory system where every human cell, every individual would live out their natural life and not die unnecessarily. And so the monetary system is not a great circulatory system. There's plenty of food, but it doesn't get to the people who need it. That would never happen inside my body. Like if there's enough oxygen, it gets to the cells. It's really simple. The second framework that I speak about is the nervous system or the media system. So I know where some one of my cells is in trouble, or I can feel that my foot hurts and I can move it. So I have a sensory system that gives me the right messages such that I will make the right decisions to keep myself alive. And I don't need to talk much about the media system because we all know that we have no clue what's true anymore, which makes it really hard to make good decisions. Like, how can you have a government making good decisions if the information is bad? And the third one that I talk about is the regulatory system. And so regulatory means that I can't go beyond certain boundaries. So my body is always the same temperature. It's really cool. And there isn't any law written or documentation about how to keep my body the same temperature. It just is. That's regulation. Once upon a time, we lived in a world where doors didn't fall off of planes while they were flying. There was good regulation, so the doors never fell off of planes. Now we live in a legislative system where if the door falls off the plane, then maybe there's a trial and maybe somebody gets in trouble. But you really want regulation. I mean, I want the door on the plane. I don't want the person who messed up to get punished. I want the door on the plane in midair. And that's the difference between regulatory and legislative, which our current system is very confused about the difference between regulation. What this means is that when you're creating a democratic system or a system of any type, so if you're trying to do a systems design for the bioregional movement, the most important decisions that you make mostly are going to be about your regulatory system, right? We want to stay within planetary boundaries. So the decision making system has to have good input from the sensory system, and it has to feel fair to people because it's, otherwise people disobey or whatever it is. And it has to keep us within planetary boundaries and social boundaries. And so I've been working on new forms of economics, which are much more, I call it sufficiency economy. We've run a few games. I've run some online games, and it allows people to demonstrate what a sharing economy might look like. And I have been working on an identity system, which we call verifiable community. Identity is sort of an invisible part of the system that you don't realize you're working within. And we've also developed a pattern that we call Ostrom 5, which is how would you do dispute resolution within these groups? And we've invented a couple of live action role playing games. One of the games is the sufficiency economy game. And then the other one is called repurposing revolution, which is sort of the idea of pretending to repurpose a building and having people divide into little factions and groups and play a full day role playing game where they really start to imagine, okay, what would be the structures that we would need if we really were going to repurpose different places in our city? What types of skills would we need to train up for in order to repurpose these things? And so it's kind of it's an imaginary game that allows people to really role play and understand what does it mean to be part of a system that's functioning in a completely different way than our existing systems.
There's so many people, it seems, that are doing similar things kind of in parallel. How have you experienced, like, do you find the sort of movement siloed?
So, okay, so I'm going to say a few things. But the first thing I'm going to say is that I want French food and German cars. I don't want it the other way around. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
We love diversity. And different cultures are different, and different economic systems are different, and we all live in a values homeostasis. So people sometimes spend their time thinking about, oh, what values do we hold? And once we write down our values, then we'll know what we do together.
Mm-hmm.
But we all want privacy and we all want transparency. So those are the opposite as one another. We all want honesty, but we want people to be nice. And so all of these values that we hold, they're kind of universal values, but where we are on the scale of them is different. And they're different as the circumstances change. We want transparency in our democracy, but we want privacy about who we voted for. So we need to really not think so much about values, but what do we do together? And so that's the first thing to say is, and we are at a time of transition, right? Our existing systems are crumbling, and it would be great if we could fund lots of different experiments. And we also have to give up a little bit or a lot on the notion of there's some better way to do it or that efficiency actually matters. What actually matters is that you're in an upward spiral. What actually matters is that you can be sensitive to the changing circumstances. We live in a highly volatile environment right now. And what actually matters is that people are pretty happy doing what they're doing and that that people are well resourced to do what we're doing, which is the worst problem that we have in the movement right now, is that it's just so under-resourced. I mean, that's where I am. We've written some really great specifications. We have people who are really interested, but everywhere I go, there's no real budget for this stuff.
So I want to maybe push a bit on the budget thing, because what I've found on a couple of those bioregional calls was it's like, hey, look, there's 250 of us sitting here. So we're giving up an hour, like we're putting in an hour or 90 minutes or whatever. And on one of the calls, and I brought this up, I think it was a guy in Cuba, right? And they don't have internet. And I was like, why don't we just buy him internet right now? Because like $5 from each of us, and I used to be an Elon Musk fanboy, now I am much less so, but the Starlink thing, for like $500, we could have sent the guy from Cuba home with the internet. We've got all of these people with so many skills and quite a bit of time, and some of them have resources. But I think as to the point, we're not coordinating very well.
The ecological movement This is the biggest movement ever in human history. The amount of things that are being done is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And it's everything from people learning how to forage to people growing their own, whatever it is, food at home, to people protesting the government. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's the biggest movement in human history. Probably 60, 70% of the people in the world are involved in this thing. And so why isn't it winning? This is a really good question. And part of it is exactly what I'm saying. It's the rails. And part of it is the coordination. And so I'm just going to talk about the default system that we're already in, right? We're on this kind of treadmill. And the treadmill is run by a monetary and financial system, which is at best agnostic to ecological outcomes. Mostly it's actually destructive.
Mm,
And every time you use a bank card, you are participating in this type of economy,
mm,
an exchange economy from one to the other. You are obeying the rules of the system and the corporations. You are not involved in the natural economy, which is a metabolic economy. And it's almost impossible to get off of it. So it is about how do I get the people in my movement who are doing things to work together. I was brought in somewhere where they're talking about the systems. And in this particular area, they had a lot of people and they were talking about like what would happen if we like put people's backyards together and we were able to grow row crops,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like grains and stuff like that. Really cool idea. And they had somebody who was actually trying to grow a bunch of heritage grains. And this individual said, the problem is I can't bring it to a regular mill because they only take, whatever it is, 5 metric tons and up. And we're doing these heritage grains. And what I want to do, I've gotten a hold of some of the equipment, but the problem is getting a 10-year lease because blah, 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 right?
Mm,
And so I said to the group at the table, which was a whole bunch of people who had been brought together to talk to me about how do we create a bioregional economy.
mm,
And I said, well, what about if some group of people who actually eat these grains went down and bought a property? Everybody puts in a tenth or a 20th, co-bought this property, and it would be the mill.
mm,
And this guy can run the mill, and the high school students can learn to fix the equipment and blah, blah, blah. And in the worst case, if it goes under, you sell it and the property prices probably went up
mm,
and you're happy, right? That's the worst case. In the best case, you have, a really cool thing that you co-own as the commons of your group.
mm,
And somebody said, well, I know how we could get this farmer a 0% loan.
right.
And I'm like, look,
You
you
just
want
solve
to eat these grains, right? But you're putting 100% of the risk on him. The problem isn't that the loan is 0%. The problem is it's a loan, and this farmer who's actually doing the service that you need, who's been burned more than once in the past, you think that it's his responsibility to deliver you food, and if you don't like it, you're going to buy it from somebody else. And you, as a community, this is a broken relationship between where your food comes from, because you're buying it with money,
it.
and you have no skin in the game, and all the skin in the game is with these farmers.
I love this because what I've felt for about a decade is we all we all buy food the way we pay rent as an expense. Whereas if we were owners of a co-op farm, we would have invested and we might still pay, but we would kind of get foods as dividends. So I think it's similar to what you're talking about is own the factors of production. And so what I'm very curious about, and it's even in these groups too, I was like, how much effort would it take to spin up a co-op um, for whatever it is? Where did it go with that group? Did they move forward?
No, I mean, they kind of changed the subject because nobody was thinking, I want to put $10,000 of my money into this thing. And I definitely don't want to ask my neighbors to do it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the entire relationship. And so I'm talking about something different. It's like slightly nuanced from a co-op,
Okay.
right? Because a co-op is going to have to be a for-profit business in the for-profit society.
Okay.
This is much more like community stewardship of a commons.
Okay.
This mill the, is is a community center. It's a place where our children learn in the high school to fix equipment.
Mm,
They learn where their food comes from. They co-run it, and it might make money as a for-profit and it might not, but it really isn't designed for that. It's designed for food resilience if things go to
well,
hell. And if we all put rows of grains in our backyards and brought it to the mill, or just let the farmer grow it in our backyards, we might not be paying anything. Like this farmer goes and grows some stuff in our backyards and we get a little bit of a food basket, or maybe we don't get anything. But what the heck were we doing with our backyard anyway?
yeah,
Right? We just let it go wild. We do rewilding of it, whatever we do. So it starts to change the relationship of ownership and being in the economy, because you might say as a cooperative, like, oh, we're not profitable, we have to close. But as this community mill, we might say we don't care if we're profitable because we're not paying the staff. We're all getting food. We're doing it as a volunteer. It's being fun. And we don't want to sell the property. We want to keep making this thing in case whatever it is, the seven continent supply chain breaks down. So the purpose isn't to be part of the existing economy, it's to be resilient in the next economy.
yeah. I guess where I would push back a little bit on that is where people are volunteering. As a nature red in tooth and claw kind of ecologist, if the system you're proposing is reliant on volunteerism, let's just try these things because they will essentially live or they will die.
All these ideas need to be tried. I
Mm,
agree. And the thing about volunteering, it's really hard to like, yeah, it's a real problem. This goes back to the funding for our movement. And it goes back to what you were saying. Where is this balance between, but we've got all this time and resources, and we could be doing something even without $10 million.
yeah.
And $10 million isn't that much money given what we're trying to do. But like, and so there is a balance. And what does that mean? And in terms of like the mill, it would be, if we were talking about some project like that, you'd want one or two full-time paid people.
Hmm.
And obviously, this farmer who's doing the heritage grains would be making a profit. And
Hmm.
it's a question around the community. Like, how do we create a group of people who do live together and they have this kibbutz where they all, right, they share their food and maybe they don't have much dependency on money. And that's what the game that I invented, the sufficiency economy, right?
Hmm.
You used a different terminology, but like what do I actually need as a sufficiency economy?
Hmm.
And a sufficiency economy doesn't just ask the question of like, how many calories a day do I need? It asks the question, where's it coming from? If I need this
Yeah.
many chickens and we have this many people here and the apples just did not work out this year. Now what do we as a community do is a very different question. And the example I often give is, let's say we had fleets. What if we all didn't have individual cars, but
Yeah.
we had a fleet? And then there's plenty of software for you get a car when you need it, et cetera, et cetera. Now you've spread the cost of fixing it and the insurance and whatever over your entire fleet, and that all goes away. All those costs go away, and then a car or a truck breaks down. Now, as an individual, all you can do is go to the mechanic. But as a community, you can say, what if we taught all of our high school students to build cars out of old parts?
Yeah.
It's a solution that's only available in a cooperative environment, in a co-ownership environment.
Well, and I guess what I like about this, and really for me, I'm so chomping at the bit to kind of put it in to see where the rubber hits the road a lot more.
I just want to go back to this eco-village idea, right?
Yeah.
Because what you described about co-living, and I can tell you where the rubber hits the road because that was the first thing I started studying. Because what I started asking myself is, okay, one of the attributes of money is that it can be individually held.
Hmm.
And so I was working with DAOs and cooperatives and all this stuff. I'm the DAO expert in Web3. I did write this book. It's called So You've Got a DAO. There's a group that was doing a DAO, and they came and they consulted with me about a sort of a collective of artists that they were going to throw in there. They were going to have a DAO together, and if somebody made money, they were going to share the profits and whatever. And I said, look, that's all good until somebody in the collective becomes famous
Hmm.
because they'll leave. If you start to sell your if you start to sell your paintings for $50,000 a pop, you don't want to be in your collective anymore. And so these collectives because money can be held individually very easily, the best people don't want to share what they've got because money is such an individual thing. And if you think about how different societies may have done this, right? You've got one person who really is the best bison hunter
Mm-hmm.
or the best basket maker. And they're just so outstandingly better than everybody else, right? In those societies, look, if you were the best bison hunter, you couldn't eat that much bison. You had to share it with the community. Nobody could hoard those things. Money can be hoarded indefinitely, infinitely by one person and passed on to their children. And that kind of distortion makes it really hard to hold collectivism in a monetary system
Mm-hmm.
because the best people are going to break off and leave. My findings at this point within the Eco Village network is that these kinds of groups of social groups of, multiple families living together, they have a few cutoff points. If they actually get to the point where they've bought the land, they tend to make it, but 10 years is one point where they often end up dissolving.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is they just keep going. There's some 40-year-old and 50-year-old eco villages. Quite a few of them have a problem of continuity because
Mm-hmm.
they haven't grown beyond 30 families or 40 families, and getting young people in and having that turnover is really difficult in a small group like that.
You're probably aware of this book too. The guy that wrote Blueprint for a Good Civilization or something sort of observed that there were like these five social traits that are throughout every human society ever. But he has a really big section on intentional communities and the difference between like people who are like shipwrecked and forced into like a community versus people who go off into eco villages, and how so often it either became like a sex cult because it was some charismatic leader, all of the problems around that. And so I suppose what my interests are let's not aim too high, but are there coordination things like one level above the individual coordination practices? Because I think so much of it is cultural.
It all does have to be very local and very appropriate for the culture. For example, in Europe, the Eco Village network in Italy is one of the biggest networks. And I have a hypothesis that this is because these are very open communal type people. And in certain cultures, it's much harder to do that because people don't tell you to your face, especially in Europe, what they actually think.
Mm-hmm.
And in the cultures which are more closed, it's harder. The German network has a lot of people, but they have a very interesting, like they have gotten very good with their legal structures. In France, there's an organization called Les Passages, which has developed a whole methodology around the legal agreements and the values agreements that you get to, so that when people come together to buy this land, it can't be resold back into the market.
Right.
And that people will, and Les Passages in France has also created a system where if you need to leave because your 10 years is up or because you have an argument, that you're made whole. And
Mm-hmm.
they've actually created a whole system around, really systematize the issues so that the land doesn't end up getting back into the capital markets. And that has been really essential for these things so that people can leave these structures or these intentional communities, these cooperatives, these whatever, but the land doesn't go back into their hands.
Yeah.
And that's key because what happens after 10 years of an ecological project is that land is the best land around.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the people, if they sell out, they can be made whole. Some organizations are like incorporating as churches or creating in the United States, there's some ways that you can actually use maritime law.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard all kinds of really creative solutions. The most creative one was one in Spain. These guys basically what they did is they bought this land and then they created a title deed for every meter squared
Okay.
so that nobody would ever want to try and buy it again.
Okay.
I do want to talk about how do we create these groups because that's really what I've been working on, and that's what I think is one of the core components that we cannot coordinate without. It doesn't matter that we can see each other and find each other and influence each other if we don't have a thing you can join. Right now, all of us use a government issued ID and we use a bank account. Those two things lock us into the existing system. And we use Google Maps and an iPhone or whatever it is, and we are locked into the existing network. These are the fundamental rails, and they're technological rails that if you have them, you're in that network and you are not in another network which would allow you different types of economic activities. And the fundamental thing that we're missing is an identity solution that allows us to see one another. Membership cards that allow us to know who's who and who's in. Okay, let's say you're a group of eco villages or intentional communities or regenerative farms. And in each farm, there's members. And you give out membership cards. So I know you're a member of this 100 farms or whatever it is, 100 people in the eco village, and I know you're a member. Now, when you travel, we could have a multilateral agreement that you don't stay in a hotel, you stay with one of us. As long as you're in and you have a membership card, we share our beds with one another. And I know I can trust you because if you screw up, I call your farm and I say, hey, John was not cool. And they say, listen, we'll make it right, or we'll take away his membership card. Okay. Now we could have a multilateral agreement to stay at each other's house, to give each other's rides, to have a fleet, like I talked about a fleet. Who gets to use the cars in the fleet, or the bicycles in the fleet, or the canoes in the fleet? Without these membership cards, you're onboarding people into this bioregional movement without knowing who you can trust, whether you can trust them, what you can trust them for, and how to remediate if they screw up. And that's where we are completely unable to have any agreements that are outside of the existing system because we don't have, you can call it a technological layer, but I'm just going to call it a membership layer. And so you need to have a network, a trust network where people co-vouch for one another. And I know what authority I can go to if somebody violates that. And we can't even create those authorities without membership cards. And that's the fundamental infrastructure. And when I talk about systems, that's the system. But right now, without any membership layer, without any identity layer, without any trust layer, we're just a ragtag bunch of people. Although we're 60, 70, 80% of the people on Earth, without that infrastructure, you're in the system and we don't have an alternative to get out.
We all really do want the same thing. And I think we're such a little mind shift from, I'm like, why don't we just all shop carbon negative?
Only after we can tell you what you can join can we get you onboarded. Now I'm at least 1 foot in an alternative parallel system. That's the kind of thing that we're missing in order to look like a movement.
I would love to know that I have 10 people that I could turn to who would like whisk me out of town and or just feed me. And then kind of going from there.
That's mutual, like not that like they're just your 10 friends, but the 10 of you have created a pact together.
To me, the great discovery of the value of it is the notion of reciprocity. Because when I think of my immediate circle, I'm in film and TV. There's a lot of people with time and skills, but not a lot of money. Why don't we do the equivalent of building a barn, or setting up a artisanal flour mill?
The problem with commitment pools is the problem with most economic systems. The way I say it is like this. The problem is that a breastfeeding mother is considered 2 free riders. That is not valued. And so you really need an economic system that is a little more holistic in terms of there's groups. That's why I keep talking about groups.
Mm-hmm.
Because within the group, when that mother is breastfeeding, those people are taken care of without having to be part of the commitment pools or our banks or cryptocurrency. You really need to create an economy, a sufficiency economy, like you said, that is going to make sure people don't die just because this month they didn't feel well and couldn't do any work.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? We as Westerners really need to think hard about that because we don't have those built into our society or into our religion or any of it.
I live in Quebec where we have universal childcare. And that was pure social engineering. They wanted more Quebecers, right? So they made it easier to have larger families. It got a lot more moms back into the economy, young parents and whatever. And so we have achieved in pockets these kind of social safety nets.
One of the things that I saw being culturally appropriate was in the Basque country. The Basque people have weekend work days. And the idea is that the villages and squats, when they're trying to do a big project like a barn raising, like they don't do barn raisings, but it might be building their compostable toilet, or it might be reforesting, or it might, whatever it is. And what I noticed was that when I came to a work day, he said, "Oh, what village sent you?" And he kind of like checked in his head, like there was an
Yeah.
accounting system.
Yeah.
And you could create an accounting system around that, just like, okay, we're going to have, whatever it is, river cleanup days, and we're going to have an accounting system that just lets people know, who's come, who hasn't come, and if it was within your trust. And then you start to create a tremendous amount of economic value and trust.
Mm-hmm. And
And
joy.
then you got, like, and again, there's sharing tool sheds, but I think that the fundamental way to start is thinking about commons,
Mm-hmm.
right? Creating resources that we share, creating work around those resources that we share, like beach cleanup or reforestation, or a tool shed where we share our tools, or a bicycle share, or whatever. And the more we create shared commons, the more we can really reestablish, low impact communities and low impact societies, but that also have high quality of life.
With the sort of container of something like commitment pools, part of what I think, like with what you're saying around commons, is like I would put 10 hours into almost anything, right? Like just for the fun of it, but perhaps with some sort of, when we talk about accountability, like some sort of notion of, oh, there will be reciprocity. I don't know what that's going to look like, and I don't much care. This will circulate.
This goes back to culturally appropriate. Most of us don't work in those basic industries. And
Mm-hmm.
in the West, what happens when you try to do that is what I was talking about with the mill and this farmer. And he always ended up being the person who gave the most and got the least
Yeah.
because nobody else was making the things that he needed.
Well, that actually reminds me of one of the elements of that guy's book, Grocery Story. And it was the example of farmers markets where, and I've got one near me where you've got like 20 people showing up with their tiny little stall, right? That's a day. That's a day of labor to sell your mushrooms or your honey. His sort of like counter is like, well, rather than have that farmer market, have a co-op grocery stores. There's no reason it can't be profitable, right? Like you can do co-op housing with an expectation that it is going to actually bring in money.
People are working on different scales and different timelines, right? So some people are like, look, we just have to do what we can right now by, whatever it is, free range, local, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like an immediate solution, right? And this is like Horizon One, we're doing things within the current system. And then Horizon Two is like, there's some modifications to the current system. We can have cooperatives instead of individual ownership, but we still make a profit. And that's going towards some Horizon Three thing. I personally only work at, like, what I'm working on are things that completely envision a totally new economy,
Mm-hmm.
a totally new economy, moneyless economy, because I don't think we need money as a proxy anymore. My trajectory is to try and get people to envision a much further out vision. That's why the games, because we can't
Right.
implement all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why the cooperatives and the community owned thing and the stewardship models. How far out are you thinking? And also, how local are you thinking? And what aspects are you working on? Are they more social aspects? Are they more ecological aspects? Are they more about restoring the rivers or more about restoring our food supplies? I'm not as practical as a lot of people because what I'm really trying to do is shift trajectories.
The example of commercial co-ops, I was following one. It was in the States where this group formed together, 1,000 people, $1,000 each. They bought 3 buildings. They did a brew pub, a whatever, and a whatever. Like these 3 lovely little businesses, but the board was all volunteers. And so 10 years later, I was like, oh my God, they're going to be gone. But they weren't gone. They'd survived. But the woman who was the main kind of instigator was like, oh yeah, the burnout is real. Whereas I guess what I see with either a cryptocurrency or whatever is like if you had a co-op with 100 members and the board's going to do 100 hours of board work every year, each of those members throws in the equivalent of an hour of their time. so that the board members can get essentially paid out whatever the resource is, right? Like my thing's videos, yours is facilitating or writing.
There's a lot of really interesting experimentation going on around these things, and I think we need to try it all. The main problem, and we keep going back to the volunteer, is that all of these efforts are underfunded. It's 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 an abomination how underfunded this thing is. Like everywhere you go. We're volunteering because it makes money to work as at a bullshit job, to do advertising, to be a lawyer. It pays money to be on an oil rig. It pays money to do all these things that are horribly destructive to our environment or completely useless, like write copy and AI and just our entire job system is on its head. And the jobs that are needed so that we're going to have air 10 years from now are not paying jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's truly an abomination that the people who could fund this don't fund this because we're all going to, we're all going to die anyway, but we are killing our children, we are killing our environment because it pays to cut down a tree and it doesn't pay to plant a tree. I don't really know the solution to that, but I do want to say that out loud.
I kind of think sometimes of like we need a permaculture of people because when we're circulating this money, um, we want to slow spread and soak it. And this is a bit where I do wonder about how do we keep this human energy within the communities that we want as much as possible.
You don't need money to live. You need oxygen, you need food, you need some shelter, right? Like, especially if you're in Canada. But you don't need money. You need these resources and you don't need insurance. You need a community that'll hold you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, if I know that if something happens to my kids, the community will hold them. I don't need to buy insurance and I can do more of what I really believe that I should be doing. So all of the resources that we hold in money are resources that we're not holding in community. There
Mm-hmm.
didn't used to be insurance. It was just taken for granted that when you got old, you were taken care of. How much essential services can we provide to the people in our bubble,
Mm-hmm.
whatever our bubble is, right? So that they can be freed up to do the work that's really important. It's much more about thinking about a resource economy than where's the money. That's what I'm trying to think about when I think about resilience. How do we consider what it is we produce and what is our carrying capacity, and how do we as a collective of people ensure that we're going to have fresh water and ensure that we're going to have food even just next year, and then bring more and more people into that collective of people who are carrying one another.
No, I am the walrus.
Quelle horreur.